Well, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to start working on the deck of the ship. And the first things we're going to do is actually add some walnut, basically borders around this, these two openings here. This opening is going to be actually where the ship's bell goes, and then this is just a hatch that goes down to the lower decks. There'll be a ladder and some grating and stuff that we'll eventually add in there. So we're going to be using this 2 by 7 millimeter walnut planking. So it's going to basically stick up out of here. The instructions say it needs to stick up about 4 millimeters. On both of these. So the vast majority of this plank is actually going to be above the deck. So the first thing we got to do is just cut a couple pieces in here. We'll start with the ship's bell portion, and then we'll move on to there. So step one here is what you always want to do with any of these planks is to kind of just sand them. I've got a low grit sanding sponge, and this just kind of smooths it all down. There we go, that's good enough. That just takes any edges off or anything like that and really gets it smooth. So let me reset and reposition the camera so you can kind of see what I'm doing down here. Okay, so the first pieces that we're going to cut out are going to run this direction along there. According to the instructions, they should be 20 millimeters, and I'll double check that. And yep, 20 millimeters right on. So let's go and I like using a little triangle or a little square to be able to make sure I'm making lines that are perfectly perpendicular to that. Now the 7 millimeter walnut's probably going to be a little bit thick for me to use kind of the plank cutter, so I'm going to have to cut this using the miter saw. Just kind of line it up, and usually I try to err on the side of cutting it a little bit long because it's always easier to sand and take it down to the length you need versus trying to make it longer, of course. Okay, and yeah, it's going to be a touch long to fit in there. Should be able to straighten it up. Just about got it. I want to check that since it's supposed to stick up 40 millimeters, I just took two of the whole planks that are 2 millimeters thick, glued them together just to kind of make a little gauge. It's easier than sticking a ruler in there, and yeah, that's going to be perfect. I kind of figured it would be fine because we have the beam and stuff running there. That'll account for it. It'll be a little bit more important down there where we're not really, there's nothing to set the little beams on. So So that's the first one. Let me go and we'll get the second one here. So now I'm just going to take a little bit of CA just at the bottom edge, and may as well put a little drop right on that beam there. Do the same thing on the other side. There we go. I was afraid that one was leaning a little bit, and sure enough it was, but I got it pressed up against there. Now it's vertical, and that's one thing. So now we just need to cut two 16 millimeter pieces that'll go crosswise. So I'm going to go move the camera so it's easier for me to get in there and make sure everything is right. We'll come back and look at it when it's done. All right, so I've got these 4 pieces put on in here, and I've put the 2 longer pieces on here. And before I put the other ones on, I wanted to point something out to y'all in case anybody's building this kit or is also relatively new to modeling. As good as these kits are and as expensive as they are, there are in fact mistakes in the instructions and in the parts lists and things like this. And this is a good example of one of those areas. So I'm going to hold some of the instructions up here in front of the camera so you can see. So there's the step that's talking about putting these pieces on. And I want you to notice part 73. That's the part that runs right along here that I haven't put in yet. And if I go then to the parts list, we'll see if we can find it in here. There we go. There's part 73. And if you look, it says it's 2 by 7 by 16 millimeter. Okay. And same as part 74, which was these 2 parts that go in there. Well, if you look at it, this is definitely longer than what this is. And sure enough, if you go and measure it, it's not 16 millimeters, it's 23 millimeters, which I've cut one piece already. And we can see that it's going to go and just, fit in there nicely. So you always have to make your own measurements. Those parts lists and stuff, they're good guides. And most of the time they're pretty good, but there are mistakes in them. And you got to account for them. I mean, if you cut one short here, I don't know if there's any other, if you'll be able to reuse that piece, But from my experience with the other Ochre kits is this walnut and some of the odder, like I said, size pieces. And I don't mean odd in that they're just uncommon sizes. It's they're not the real bulk pieces like all of the planking and stuff like that. These they kind of have just enough for you to do the model in there, or maybe a little bit left over. You can make one or two small mistakes with these pieces, and otherwise you're going to have to go and probably order some. Whereas opposed to like the planking, whether it was the heavy inner planking, the outer sepally, or the deck planking, they give you plenty of that. You can make a whole bunch of mistakes with those pieces and still have some left over. But the walnut, some of the more expensive pieces of woods, or the 1x1 or 2mm by 2mm, 3mm by 3mm beams and stuff like that, they give you just pretty much enough to build the model. So it's always best, don't waste material, but also don't rely entirely on those measurements in there. Always make your own measurements, because they're not always correct. So let me go. I'm going to glue this piece in. I still have to cut and make the other piece, and then we'll come back in, and I think the next step is to build a ladder. Okay, we're ready to move on to the next step, which I said is to make the ladders. But these things are more of actually like a spiral staircase, and there's a total of 6 of them that go on the deck. They're made from these laser cut parts, so you can see that, and then you basically just stack them up to form the staircase and stuff. But we're going to die these things, and this was one of the first major decision points I had to make within this kit. Is it the instructions say to dye them walnut, and the truth is I do not like the walnut color of the ochre dye. To me, it looks very greenish. I did try another walnut dye, and I mean on here. So this was the ochre. This was some just walnuts stain I have, and if I was doing a picture frame or something like that, it would be a great thing. But you can see it that kind of brings out the grain of the wood, which is not true to scale on this. So we don't want that. This here is the ochre walnut dye, and like I said, to me it looks very greenish. I'm not sure how the camera's picking it up. But this is the sepally ochre wood dye, and so that's the one I think I'm going to use. I like the reddish color, and since I planked the inside sepally, I think it's just going to match up like better than the walnut is. And even though the walnut, the actual wood that we're cutting that's walnut, does not look this color. It's actually not all that different, maybe a little bit lighter than the sepally. So I'm going to do these in sepally dye rather than the walnut dye. And so one of the things you need to do before you dye these, because they're a laser cut part, we can see on the edges here that it's all, you get the dark burn marks from the laser going through. So all that has to be removed. And so first thing is to kind of use a knife to clean up where it was connected. But we want to get it down to almost this neutral color. So there you go. I mean, this is a pretty fine sandpaper. I think it's about an 800 grit, so it really doesn't take that much. But that's where I just sanded, and then there's the dark, color. So we want to get it down to that neutral, so that otherwise when we dye it, it's just going to look black or very dark on those sides. So I'm going to go sand all of these, and then we'll come back and we'll dye them. So each of the pieces now has been cleaned up and sanded. I've also sanded the top surface of each one. Okay. So I'm just going to put the dye here on this little palette. We'll brush it on. Now, one thing about this Sepali dye is initially it's going to look like it's a little uneven on there. You can see kind of the grain is kind of showing and stuff, but as it dries, it turns a constant color across the whole thing and actually kind of hides the grain. So it's just one of the, if you're using any of their stuff, that's kind of, I think all of their wood dyes kind of work that way. Initially, it highlights the grain, and then eventually, as it dries, just turns into a uniform color. Even the walnut that I don't really like does that. Didn't do the backside here. Put a little bit more dye. I usually kind of like to go over most of this stuff twice. Really, I'm just going to do the top. Now, you might wonder, well, why didn't I assemble it before I dyed it? And I thought about doing that, and you could do it either way, except I'm going to probably just use some CA to glue these pieces together. And the problem with CA is wherever it touches and you get it, that wood will not take this dye anymore. So you could then put the dye over it, and if you had a little bit of drop of CA or something that's exposed, it's just going to be that white, almost cream color that the wood naturally was. The dye will just will not be able to absorb in, and it'll roll off. So you'd have to be really, really careful and stuff about where you're putting the glue and all that. I'm going to be very careful with it, but I just decided that I'm not really wasting much in the way of the dye, even though a lot of what it is going to be covered, and it's just going to avoid a potential problem, because then if you only get the exact number of these pieces that you need. And it would, I mean, although I probably could find some wood and carve it out and make a replacement part, once they're glued together, you kind of almost would have to make a whole replacement staircase. So it's just easier and safer to dye them first. Then I'll glue them together. Then if a little CA, leaches out or something from between the two pieces, it's not going to be that big a deal. And then when they get varnished, any of that will just get covered up anyway. So we're going to go let these dry, and then we'll come back and assemble the stairs. Okay, we're back, and the wood dye is all dried and turned into a nice uniform color. As you can see, I laid all of the pieces out in order, and then we're just going to simply stack them. Now, if you look at the largest piece, there's a shorter edge and a longer edge, and the shorter edge is at where the step is, and then the longer edge is going to, I guess, just be the other side that's going to go straight up, so it'll spiral in this case this way. So I'm just using some thick CA, and it's just putting a little dot of it on there. It doesn't really take that much. You just stack it on there and form the first step, and just keep repeating the process. So you want to make sure this edge is going to be straight all the way up, and then the back, the curve, everything needs to kind of line up on it. All right, and we got one more piece to go here, this little tiny thin one. All right, there we go. One spiral staircase. So we've got one down and 5 more of these things to go. So we'll come back once I get them all done, and we'll mount them onto the deck. Well, I've got all 6 of the spiral staircases done. You got to pay attention when you're building them, because you do need to have 3 that are rotating counterclockwise and 3 that are clockwise. I'm showing you here 4 of them that are in there, and I actually didn't place them yet. I decided that I think they're going to be easier to put varnish and stuff on and everything without them actually being glued in place. So I'll probably wait until I get more of the deck stuff done. And then once I pull out the varnish, I'll varnish those and then put them in place. And the other thing I didn't notice, and here's one of the other ones that aren't mounted, is that 2 of them are actually slightly different than these 4 that you hear. Basically, all of these have 6 steps, including these that I built, but we have to cut a piece of walnut to make a 7th step for these, and because they need to be a little bit higher. And when I first test fitted them after building them, I was kind of shocked when they kind of passed right underneath the deck they're supposed to lead up to, and I kind of didn't think I could have possibly even have gotten the deck height wrong, because there was a lot of pieces and everything associated with it. But in the actual instructions, they don't have you make all 6 of these at the same time. You make these 4, and then later on, stepwise, they have you make the final 2, and it's in those later steps that they indicate that you need to add a 7th step to these spiral staircases, and you just cut it out of some walnut. So that would give those at the back there the perfect height. So I think this is a good spot to conclude this video. We did some of the trim work up here. We did these stairs. I think the next video we're going to be doing some of the hatch gratings and stuff, and some more of the other hatches and everything. We'll get some of that stuff done. And yeah, so good spot to end this. I'm going to continue working on the outer planking to get that done. I'll show you, once it's done, what it looks like. We'll kind of do a review of that. So if you like what you're seeing and want to continue and follow along as I build this ship, please subscribe and post a comment. Love to hear from you. Thank you for watching.